I never thought a stranger's voice could unravel me. But the first time Elias spoke, it was like he'd reached inside my chest and tugged at something I'd buried years ago. It was a Tuesday in late August, the kind of humid evening in Savannah, where the air clings to your skin like a lover who won't let go. I was sitting on my porch, barefoot, my linen dress sticking to my thighs, a glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the cicadas humming their endless song. That's when I heard him low warm, like whiskey over gravel, calling out to someone about a missing toolbox. I'm Nora, by the way, 34, a painter who makes a living teaching art to kids at the community center. I'm not the kind of woman who falls apart over a man. I've got my own life, my canvases, my messy bun, my coffee-stained sketchbooks. I've been alone since my divorce 2 years ago, and I was fine with that, or so I thought. But Elias, he moved into the old craftsman house next door, and suddenly, my quiet life felt like it was holding its breath. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured some retiree or a young couple when I saw the moving truck. Instead, there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a faded blue t-shirt that hugged his arms, and when he caught me staring from my porch, he grinned, a slow, knowing curve of his lips that made my stomach flip. Evening, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. That was it. One word, and I was already imagining what it'd feel like to hear him whisper my name. I didn't mean to get close. I told myself I'd keep my distance. My ex Tom left me with enough scars, emotional, not physical, that I'd sworn off men who made my pulse race. But Elias had this way of pulling me in, like gravity. The next day I was watering my azaleas when he leaned over the fence, holding a wrench. His forearms streaked with grease. You know anything about fixing a leaky sink? He asked, that voice of his wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I laughed, nervous, and said I was useless with pipes but good with a paintbrush. He smiled again, and I swear, the air between us crackled. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Mornings I'd catch him jogging past my house, his shirt clinging to his chest, sweat glistening on his skin. I'd pretend I wasn't watching, but my eyes betrayed me, lingering on the way his muscles moved. Evenings he'd sit on his porch with a guitar, strumming soft melodies that drifted over to me. Sometimes I'd sit out there too, sketching, letting the music seep into my bones. We'd talk small things at first. The heat, the best coffee, shop in town, how I liked to paint at dawn when the light was soft. But soon, it got deeper. He told me he was a carpenter, that he'd moved here after a bad breakup, chasing a fresh start. I told him about Tom, how he'd made me feel small, how I'd spent years rebuilding myself. Elias listened like he was memorizing every word, his gaze steady, intense, like he could see the parts of me I didn't show anyone. One night, a storm rolled in. The sky was bruised purple, and the air smelled of rain and electricity. I was on my porch, watching lightning flicker in the distance, when Elias appeared at the fence, his hair damped from a quick run to his truck. You shouldn't be out here, he said, his voice low, teasing. Storm's coming. I shrugged, feeling bold. Maybe I like storms. He raised an eyebrow, and before I knew it, he'd vaulted over the fence and was standing on my porch, close enough that I could smell the cedar and sawdust on his skin. My breath caught. He was so close, his chest rising and falling, his eyes locked on mine. Your trouble, Nora, he said, his voice a soft rumble that sent heat curling through me. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, stepping closer, or maybe it was him, his hand brushing my arm, his fingers lingering on my skin. The air was thick, charged, and when his thumb grazed the inside of my wrist, I felt it everywhere, my pulse, my spine, the backs of my knees. Tell me to go, he murmured, his lips so close I could feel his breath. I didn't, I couldn't. Instead, I tilted my head, and his mouth found mine, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every second. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him. The storm forgotten, the world narrowing to the heat of his touch. The way his fingers pressed into my hips, the soft groan in his throat when I kissed him back. We didn't go further, not that night. The storm broke, rain pounding the roof, and we ended up on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, our legs tangled, my head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady under my ear, and his fingers traced lazy circles on my shoulder. We talked until dawn about his childhood in Tennessee, my dreams of showing my art in a gallery, the way we both felt like we'd been running from something. He told me he hadn't meant to stay in Savannah, that he was supposed to keep moving. But now he wasn't so sure. I felt it too, this pull, this thing between us that was more than desire. It was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing, but there was a shadow. Elias had a secret, one he didn't share until a week later. When we were lying in my backyard under the stars, the grass cool beneath us, his hand warm in mine. He'd been engaged before, he said. She'd died in a car accident, and he'd blamed himself for years. He didn't think he deserved to feel this way again. Not with me, not with anyone. His voice broke, and I saw the pain in his eyes, raw and unguarded. I wanted to fix it, to take it away, but all I could do was hold him, my lips brushing his jaw, my hands framing his face. "You're allowed to be happy," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "You're allowed to want this." That night, we crossed a line, not in a reckless way, but in a way that felt inevitable, like we'd been building to it since that first evening on my porch. We were in my bedroom, the windows open, the air heavy with jasmine and the promise of rain. His hands were slow, reverent, sliding under my shirt, tracing the curve of my spine. Every touch was a question, every kiss an answer. I felt worshipped, desired, seen. His breath was warm against my neck, his voice a low murmur of my name. And when he pulled me close, our bodies pressed together. It was like we were rewriting each other's stories, erasing the pain, the fear, the doubt. The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, his arm draped over me, his breath soft against my shoulder. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if he'd stay, if I'd be enough, if we could build something real from this fire between us. But as I lay there, watching the way the light caught the stubble on his jaw, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope, not the naive kind, but the kind that's been through hell and still believes in love. I didn't need promises or forever. I just needed this, his warmth, his voice, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. I'm still Nora, still flawed, still painting my way through life. But now, when I pick up my brush, I see colors I didn't before, blues like his eyes, golds like the light on his skin, reds like the heat he stirs in me. And every night when I hear his voice across the fence, calling my name, I know I'm not just living, I'm burning, bright and alive, in a way I never thought I could be again. I never meant to fall in love with a man who wore grief like a second skin, but there he was, standing in my driveway with a hammer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, as if he didn't know he was the kind of beautiful that could wreck a woman quietly. My name is Cora, 35, divorced, a school counselor in a town that tries too hard to feel like a city. I live in a modest blue house with creaky floors and a backyard that swallows the sun in late afternoons. I'd convinced myself that this was a new life of order, of peace, of walls that didn't echo with the sound of a man leaving. Then, he moved in next door. His name was Ben, 41, a carpenter, maybe, or a man who used his hands to forget. Tall, broad-shouldered with dark hair he wore like an apology, and hands that looked like they'd both built and broken things. I watched him through the blinds that first week more than I care to admit. There was a stillness to him, the kind that comes after a storm you don't talk about. The first time we spoke, he was fixing the fence between our yards. "Your side kept falling," he said, not looking at me. Figured I'd help it stay up. I remember nodding, then asking, "Are you always this neighborly, or just when women are watching?" He finally looked at me then. His eyes were a gray that didn't shine, just held you there. "Only when they smell like lilacs and loneliness." I laughed, even though it wasn't funny. He smiled, even though it didn't reach his eyes. From then on, it was subtle, unfolding like dusk, slow and almost unnoticed until it was all around me. He started showing up with tools when things broke. My porch light, the leaky faucet, the loose step. I never asked. He just knew, and I let him in. Little by little, we talked about nothing and everything. He hated cilantro, loved thunderstorms, said the only music that ever made sense was old blues. I told him my ex-husband left on a Tuesday, took the dog, left the dishes. Ben didn't say much, just handed me a glass of wine and let the silence be what it needed to be. One night, I found him sitting on my back steps. He had that cigarette again, but he wasn't smoking, just holding it. Like maybe the habit was gone, but the ritual remained. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "There's a box in my garage I haven't opened in 3 years. I think it has her scent still." I sat beside him, knees touching. It was the first time we touched without needing to. His breath caught. Mine followed. "Was she your wife?" "She was, ... someone I loved when I was still capable of it." The air between us felt fragile, like a sheet stretched too thin. I didn't ask more. Instead, I rested my head on his shoulder. He let me. His hand found mine, fingers calloused and warm, wrapping around me with a tenderness that felt undeserved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how he smelled faintly of cedar and rain, how his body had been so still next to mine, how I had wanted to kiss the hollow just below his jaw. It wasn't long before the touches lingered longer. A brush of his hand at my lower back, the way his gaze would drift to my lips when I spoke. He made me feel like I was a moment worth pausing for. One afternoon, I was in my kitchen, covered in flour, trying to bake something I knew I'd ruin. He showed up at the back door without knocking, holding a bag of peaches. "Trade you these for whatever you're burning," he said. I laughed, brushing hair from my cheek. "Deal, but I can't promise you won't regret it." He stepped inside, closer than usual. "I never regret showing up here." I looked up at him then. "Really?" Looked. His face was tired, like it had lived too many lives. But his eyes, they were alive, watching me like I was a secret he wanted to memorize. I think that was the moment I knew. He touched my face, flour and all. His thumb traced the curve of my cheek. My breath hitched. His voice was low, rough. "You make me feel like I still have something left to give." I leaned into him. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. Just breath and skin and promise. Our foreheads touched. His hands found my waist, steady and certain. "Ben," I whispered. He pulled back enough to look at me, his eyes searching. "Tell me to stop." I didn't. The kiss was slow, intentional, like he wanted to feel every second of it. His mouth was warm, and when he deepened it, I tasted longing, not just for me, but for life again. My fingers found the back of his neck, pulling him closer. His hands slid up my back, pressing me against him like we were always meant to fit. When we pulled apart, I was breathless. So was he. "I've wanted to do that since you yelled at me about the fence," he said, smiling. "I yelled because you were right. You always do that when you're scared, and you always show up anyway." That night we lay on my couch, wrapped in each other, not in a hurry, not needing more, just being. His fingers traced patterns on my arm. I listened to the steady beat of his heart and let myself believe I was safe. He told me about her, the woman who died in a car accident 3 years ago. How he spent a year drinking, another building furniture he never sold. How he never thought he'd feel anything again. I told him about the day I found out my marriage was over. How I stood in the shower for hours, trying to wash off the shame. How I stopped believing I was someone worth loving. We held each other like absolution. There was no neat bow to tie around us. He was still haunted, I was still healing, but we had something real, something built from broken things. A few weeks later, he came over with that same cigarette tucked behind his ear. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key to his place. "I want you in my mornings, not just my nights," he said. I cried then, not because I was sad, but because I finally believed it, that I could be wanted, that I could want to. So, here I am, telling you about the man next door who rebuilt me without ever asking me to be fixed, who showed me that love doesn't come with guarantees, but it comes with moments. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Sometimes, that's everything. He kissed me for the first time with the city humming below us, like the whole world knew I was falling. My name is Layla, 32, bartender, night owl, a little rough around the edges. I've lived in this city long enough to know its lies, and long enough to let it break my heart once or twice. I rent a small apartment above the bar where I work. It smells like whiskey and burnt citrus most nights. Home. I wasn't looking for anything when Jack walked in. He wasn't even my type. Clean cut, suited, probably worked in finance or something equally forgettable. But his smile, it was tired, like he was carrying something he couldn't put down. And I recognized that look. It mirrored my own the way a cracked mirror still reflects light. He sat at the end of the bar for 3 nights straight before he said more than a drink order. Old-fashioned, no cherry. On the 4th night, he finally asked my name. Layla, I said, polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. He nodded like he'd already known. You always look at the door before you pour a drink, he said. That caught me off guard. Habit, waiting for someone. Not anymore. He didn't press, just offered a quiet same. That night, I noticed the way he loosened his tie like it offended him, how he watched the room like he didn't want to be seen. When I locked up, he was still there. I raised an eyebrow. You planning to sleep here? Maybe. Seems quieter than where I live. You could come up, I said before I knew why I was saying it. My rooftop. Best view in the city. He hesitated, then nodded. We didn't talk much that night, just sat side by side on an old blanket I kept up there, the skyline flickering like it was winking at us. He asked if I always brought strangers to my roof. Only the ones who look like they forgot how to breathe. He smiled. And do they remember? Sometimes, we kept doing that. Rooftop nights, bar conversations, slow burning something neither of us named. He told me his mother used to call him after her 3rd glass of wine just to say she missed the sound of his voice, that he hadn't been back home in years, that he liked the rain but hated umbrellas. I told him I used to sing in a band that never went anywhere, that I collect matchbooks from every city I visit, that I once drove 12 hours just to feel something different. He laughed more with me than he probably did anywhere else, and I liked the way he looked at me when I spoke, like I made sense in a world that didn't single quotes t. Then one night, everything changed. It had just rained. The city smelled like asphalt and thunder. I was barefoot on the roof, letting my dress cling to me, damp and careless. He showed up. No umbrella, of course. His hair darkened by rain, his shirt clinging to him in all the places I wasn't supposed to notice. But I noticed. You're soaked, I said. So are you. He stepped close, the way people do when they're trying not to say something. His hand brushed mine, fingers tentative, like he was asking permission. You feel like a beginning, he said. And I swear, my heart stopped pretending I didn't want him. He cupped my face, slow, reverent, like he was memorizing the feel of my skin before he ever kissed it. His lips met mine in a way that unraveled me, soft at first, then deeper, needier. My hands found his chest, fingers curling into fabric, anchoring myself to him. We kissed like we had time, like the sky could split open and we wouldn't care, like we were rewriting every wound with every breath. When we pulled apart, he didn't move far, his forehead rested against mine. Tell me this isn't just the rain. It isn't. We stood there a while, breathing, wanting, becoming. Later, we lay back on the rooftop, my head on his chest. He told me he was quitting his job, moving out of the high-rise that felt more like a prison than a home. You make me want to start over, he said. I kissed the side of his neck. Start here. And he did. Now he brings me coffee before my shift, and kisses my shoulder when he thinks I'm still asleep. He still wears suits sometimes, but now he rolls the sleeves and carries the smell of my sheets. I catch him looking at me like he's still surprised I said yes. And me, I don't look at the door anymore when I pour drinks. I already know who I'm waiting for. Sometimes, you don't fall in love like a fire. Sometimes, it's quieter. A heartbeat on a rooftop, a glance across a bar, a man who teaches you that beginnings aren't just for the young or the hopeful. Sometimes they're for the broken, and that can be even more beautiful. He smelled like smoke and rain the night I let him touch me. My name is Harper, 30 nurse, fixer of things that don't stay fixed. I live in a quiet corner of Minneapolis, in a brownstone that trembles when the light rail passes. I work nights, I like silence, and I hate getting close to people who might not stay. He almost didn't. His name was Eli, firefighter 36. He came into the ER with a busted shoulder and a stubborn refusal to let anyone help him. I was the one who cleaned the blood off his arm. He didn't flinch when I pressed the gauze into his skin. Just looked at me, calm and steady. "You always glare at people who try to save you?" I asked, half smiling. "Only when they touch me like that." "Like what? Like they're scared I'll break?" He didn't, but I did. The first time he asked me out, I said no. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to too much. There was something in his gaze I wasn't ready for. Something that saw the cracks I tried so hard to keep sealed. But Eli wasn't the kind of man you avoided. He didn't chase me, just showed up. Brought coffee to the nurse's station, sat on the bench outside the ER during my breaks. Not always talking, sometimes just there. I remember one night in late October, the air sharp and tasting like snow. He handed me a cup of black coffee and said, "I know you don't do easy, but I'm not trying to be easy. I'm just trying to be real." I didn't answer. Just took the cup and sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, our breaths rising like fog. That's how it began, quiet, unspoken. He told me stories in pieces. How he watched a man die in a burning house because the roof collapsed. How his sister stopped talking to him after he missed their dad's funeral. How he sleeps with a fan on to drown out the silence. I told him less, but he never asked for more than I could give. He started sleeping on my couch on nights he couldn't go home. Said the space didn't feel so hollow here. We never touched at first, not even hugs. But he'd watch me move around my kitchen like he was memorizing it. I pretended not to notice how his eyes lingered on the back of my neck, the bend of my wrist. Then came the storm. There was a fire, a bad one. Apartment complex, 3 dead. Eli came in with burns on his side, smoke in his lungs, and silence in his mouth. He refused to bed, just stood in the ER bay, shaking, until he saw me. "I need to go home," he said. "You mean your place?" "No, yours." I took him home. He didn't speak for hours, just sat on my floor, back against the couch, head in, his hands. I sat beside him, knees touching, saying nothing. When he finally looked up, his eyes were raw. They were kids. One of them had a stuffed giraffe. I saw it, on the stairs, burned. I reached for his hand. He held on like he was drowning. We didn't sleep, just lay on the floor, side by side. At some point, he pulled me into him. My head on his chest, his hand in my hair. It was the first time I let someone hold me like that. Not because they wanted something, but because they needed to. His breath was uneven. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Do what?" "Be someone's something." I looked up at him. "Maybe you already are." He kissed me then, soft, uncertain, like he was asking. My hands found his jaw, rough with stubble. His fingers slid beneath the hem of my shirt, not with hunger, but reverence. His mouth moved against mine like it was the only thing keeping him together. We didn't rush, we just existed in each other. After, we lay tangled in silence, his hand on my bare back, my fingers tracing the scar on his shoulder. The rain started tapping the windows. He smiled, barely. "You smell like eucalyptus. You smell like fire." He looked at me, really looked, "And you still let me touch you." I wanted to, he stayed. Not every night, but enough. We fell into something neither of us knew how to name. Mornings with shared toast. Evenings where we sat in the dark, legs pressed together, watching old movies without sound. He'd kiss me like I was made of light. I'd hold him, like he wasn't a man used to holding the weight of burning things. I told him about my mom, how she died in a hospital bed while I worked 2 floors above, unaware. How I never forgave myself. He didn't say much, just pressed his forehead to mine and held my hand like it was the only truth he believed in. One night, he asked, "Do you think we're broken people trying to look whole?" I thought about it, then said, "No. I think we're broken people finding the beauty in the cracks." He kissed me like that meant everything. We never talked about forever, just the next breath, the next sunrise, The next time we'd fall asleep wrapped around each other. But I think that's what love really is. Not the big declarations, not the neat endings, just the way someone shows up again and again. Smoke-scarred, rain-drenched, and real. And the way you let them touch you when you finally believe you won't fall apart. That's how he saved me, without ever once trying to. He painted me before he ever touched me. My name is Sienna. I'm 35, curator of a small but beloved contemporary gallery in Charleston. My world is full of muted palettes, soft conversations, and the comforting scent of old wood and turpentine. I wear linen more than I should, drink my coffee black, and spend more time with art than with people. It's easier that way. Safer. And then he walked in, Julian Hart, 38, Brooklyn born, maddeningly talented, and known for never letting anyone see him paint. His agent called first, said he was looking to escape the noise and retreat to a slower rhythm. Charleston was never on his list, but the gallery was, because of me. He said my curations made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. That the spaces I created let him breathe differently. I wasn't ready for him. He arrived with a single duffel bag and paint beneath his fingernails. He looked exhausted and electric all at once, and from the first moment, he unnerved me, not because he tried, but because he didn't. He was quiet, observant, like he was listening to everything I wasn't saying. He asked for a studio space in the back of the gallery, and I gave him one. He worked odd hours, sometimes all night. I'd find him barefoot, splattered in color, whispering to the canvas like it was alive. I tried to keep my distance, professional boundaries and all that, but there was a gravity to him I couldn't ignore. And he noticed me, not in the way men often did. He noticed the way I held my breath when I looked at certain pieces, the way I touched the edges of old frames like they were skin. One evening, after closing, I brought him tea. He took the cup, but his eyes stayed on me. Do you ever let anyone see the parts of you that aren't curated? Do you always ask questions you don't want the answers to? He smiled. I always want the answers. There was silence, thick and charged, the kind that feels like a held breath before the fall. A week later, he left something on my desk, a sketch of me he hadn't asked, hadn't posed me, but it was me sitting on the gallery bench, head tilted, one hand resting on my neck. Intimate, honest, beautiful in a way that startled me. I didn't confront him, but that night when I found him working, I asked, why me? He didn't stop painting. Because you feel like something I forgot. The next few weeks blurred. We didn't cross any lines, not officially, but the air between us shifted. He'd touch my wrist when passing me, brush hair from my face without asking. I started lingering in his studio, watching him work, breathing him in like he was the last real thing in a world of illusions. One night, the storm came. Thunder echoed through the gallery, power flickered and died. I found him by candlelight, shirtless, chest glistening with sweat and streaked with paint. He looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I'd caught him in something sacred. The power's out, I said, trying to sound casual. Maybe it's supposed to be. I stepped closer. The rain tapped against the old windows. The air was warm, heavy. He didn't reach for me, just looked. You undo me, Sienna, and I don't know what to do with that. I stood in front of him, heart pounding. Maybe you don't have to do anything. Then I touched him, just my fingers on his chest, tracing the lines of color and sweat. He leaned in, barely brushing his lips over mine, soft, hesitant, reverent. When we kissed, it wasn't desperate, it was deep, slow, his hands on my waist, mine in his hair. He kissed me like I was his favorite piece, like he wanted to hang me on a wall and live inside the feeling. We stayed that way for a long time, skin against skin, breath against breath. We didn't go further, just existed in the heat and the silence. When the power returned, we were still wrapped around each other. Later, he painted me again, not in a pose, not for display for him, a private piece, tender, wild, unfinished. Like us, Julian left the gallery 6 weeks later. When his agent called him back to New York, he asked me to come with him. I said no, not because I didn't love him, but because I needed to stay whole before I could give him more than pieces. He kissed me before he left, pressed his lips to the place behind my ear and whispered, You were the first truth I painted in years. He sends me postcards now. Tiny sketches. Words written in the margins. He says he's building a studio with more light. That he hung the painting of me by his bed, and I still walk through the gallery at night, fingertips trailing frames, heart remembering the weight of his gaze. He painted me before he ever touched me, and I don't think I'll ever be the same.